The camera on Major Robert Cowboy Stout's F-6F Hellcat clicked rhythmically as he flew over the island of Peleliu, 8,000 feet above the Pacific. It was September 12, 1944. His mission was straightforward: take photos of the northern airfield, return to the USS Hornet, and report back. Command believed the place was a wreck, a ghost field beaten flat by earlier bombings. Nothing left but craters and twisted metal. But as Stout peered down through his canopy, a chill ran through him. The airfield below was very much alive. Lined up on the tarmac were rows upon rows of Japanese aircraft, gleaming Mitsubishi Zeros, squat Nakajima bombers, all neatly parked wingtip to wingtip. Fuel drums sat stacked like dominoes, and dozens of ground crew swarmed the field, refueling, rearming, preparing for something big. Stout's gut tightened. He counted 40, maybe more, each one fueled and ready to go. He didn't need a briefing to understand what was happening. In 3 days, 28,000 U.S. Marines would hit Peleliu's beaches in one of the biggest amphibious assaults of the Pacific War. The invasion fleet was already on its way. These planes weren't idle relics. They were waiting to strike first, to tear the Marines apart before they even touched sand. Every bit of training Stout had told him what to do next. Radio the find, fly back to base. Let the brass handle it. A recon pilot's job wasn't to fight, especially not against an entire airfield bristling with anti-aircraft guns. But Stout also knew how slow command could be. By the time he landed, filed a report, and someone up the chain made a decision, those planes would vanish into the jungle or be airborne and deadly. He looked down again. The choice was his. He could play it safe and follow the book, or act now, alone, before it was too late. The Marines out there didn't have hours to wait for paperwork. They needed those planes gone. Today. Stout climbed a little higher, circling slowly to take it all in. From above, the pattern was obvious. The Japanese had crammed their planes in like cordwood, bumping wingtips together with rows of fuel drums sitting out in the open. One lucky strike, one burning drum, and the whole field could turn into an inferno. He did the math in a heartbeat. His Hellcat carried twin 50 Brownings and 2,400 rounds total. Roughly a dozen seconds of steady fire. Not enough to blast 40 planes to scrap, certainly not to surgically pick them off one by one. But it was more than enough to start a very nasty chain reaction. Light the fuse, and the rest might do the work. Before we go on, tell me where you're watching from and what you already know about the Battle of Peleliu. Drop a comment. Had you ever heard about Cowboy Stout and what he did next? Stout wasn't a hothead. At 28, he'd already flown 63 combat missions. He'd tangled with Zeros, strafed fortified positions under heavy flak, and put his Hellcat down on pitching carrier decks when others stayed parked below. He knew risk, and he knew the fine line between bravery and plain suicide. What he was weighing sat right on that line. If he dove in, every anti-aircraft battery on Peleliu would paint him with fire. He'd be alone. No wingmen to draw shots, no fighters to chase him off, no suppression of the ground guns. One lucky burst through a radiator or the cockpit, and he'd be down in hostile jungle with little chance of rescue. If he held back, though, 40 armed, fueled planes could launch in waves and rip into the invasion fleet days later. The choice was brutal, and the clock was ticking. Stout could already picture what would happen if he did nothing. Those Japanese planes would take off in formation, strafe the landing craft, bomb the transports, and turn Peleliu's beaches into slaughter grounds. The Marines would die by the hundreds before they even had a foothold. He'd seen it before, at Tarawa, when Japanese bombers had torn through the first waves of landing troops. He remembered the helplessness, watching overloaded landing craft explode under attack, men trapped with nowhere to run. He wasn't about to watch that happen again. The decision came fast. Instinct, not thought. In less than half a minute, he shoved the throttle forward, rolled the Hellcat onto its side, and pointed the nose straight down. The altimeter spun like a clock gone mad as he dropped through the haze toward the jungle canopy. His plan was simple. Come in low and fast, hit the fuel drums, and get the hell out before the gunners could even swivel their barrels. At 2,000 feet, he leveled out, shoved the throttle to the stop, and the Hellcat screamed toward the target at nearly 400 miles an hour. Trees became a green blur beneath his wings as he dropped to 50 feet, skimming the jungle tops. Then, through a break in the trees, the airfield. He was right on top of it. The Japanese ground crews froze in shock as the blue Hellcat burst out of nowhere. A few men ran for cover, but none made it to their guns in time. Stout lined up the northern row of planes and squeezed the trigger. All 6 Brownings thundered at once, the roar drowning out even the engine's howl. Red tracers streaked across the runway, slashing through the thin metal skins of the first Zero. It jerked violently as bullets ripped through its fuselage, fuel spraying into the air like mist. He adjusted slightly, raking the next line of targets, a cluster of fuel drums stacked neatly between 2 bombers. The 50 caliber rounds tore through them like paper. The drums exploded in a flash of white fire, and the fuse he'd hoped to light was now burning. The fuel drums went up like a match dropped into gasoline. A single flash, then a roaring fireball swallowed the first 2 planes whole. The explosion was far bigger than Stout expected. Flames shot 50 feet into the sky, the shockwave slamming into his Hellcat and jolting it like a toy in a storm. He yanked back on the stick, climbing sharply as the airfield below erupted into chaos. Behind him, the inferno spread with terrifying speed. The burning Zero set off the bomber beside it, and that one lit another. Each detonation fed the next, until the entire northern row was a wall of fire. Ground crews scattered in panic, abandoning hoses, tools, everything. They weren't fighting the blaze. They were running for their lives. Finally, the anti-aircraft crews got their guns manned. Tracers streaked up through the black smoke, arcing toward the fleeing Hellcat. Stout felt the plane shudder under hits, thuds from 20mm rounds slamming through the tail. Red warning lights flickered across his panel, but the engine roared on, loyal and steady. He banked hard right, climbing through the smoke to survey the damage. Below him, the destruction was worse than he'd dreamed possible. Nearly 20 Japanese planes were already burning, the tarmac a glowing river of fuel-fed fire. Smoke rolled skyward in thick, oily columns visible for miles. But on the far end of the airfield, untouched, another 20 aircraft sat waiting, engines cold but ready. Stout glanced at his ammo counter. Half gone, 6 seconds of fire left, and every gun on the ground now had him locked in their sights. Turning back was suicide. Any sane pilot would have headed for open water. But sanity wasn't part of this mission anymore. He rolled the Hellcat upside down and dove again, straight into the storm. Tracers whipped past like angry hornets, the air vibrating with gunfire. He weaved left, right, ducking and twisting, refusing to hold a straight path for even a heartbeat. The plane groaned as rounds tore through its skin, metal shrieking, holes opening in the fuselage. But Stout stayed steady, eyes locked on the next line of targets below. Stout swung wide, dropping low from a new direction. The southern approach this time. The anti-aircraft gunners were ready now, but so was he. He leveled out just above treetop height and lined up the row of bombers gleaming on the runway below. He squeezed the trigger. The remaining rounds from his Brownings hammered into the line of aircraft, ripping through control surfaces, shredding wings, and punching straight into fuel tanks. Then his tracers found a fuel truck parked near the end of the strip. The bullets tore through its side, and in an instant it erupted. The explosion hit like a sledgehammer, a blinding flash, and a rolling shockwave that flipped a nearby bomber upside down like a toy. That blast set off the next disaster. Burning fuel poured across the tarmac, reaching a pile of ammunition crates stacked behind the hangar. The crates went off in a rapid, stuttering chain of explosions. The bombers themselves began to cook off, one after another, their own bombs detonating from the heat, tearing the planes apart from the inside. Within seconds, the southern end of the field was burning as fiercely as the north. Then silence. His guns were empty. The Hellcat's machine guns clicked dry, barrels smoking. Stout pulled up hard, feeling the aircraft resist him. The stick felt heavy, sluggish. Warning lights glowed across the panel. Something vital was leaking, leaving a faint gray trail of smoke behind him. But when he looked back, the sight was staggering. The entire Japanese airfield, every plane, every drum of fuel, every structure, was a sea of fire. Flames devoured everything, and a massive column of black smoke coiled into the sky, climbing thousands of feet. It looked like the death marker of an entire air wing. The death marker of an entire air wing. Stout turned his crippled Hellcat toward the ocean, coaxing it gently home. The hydraulics were fading, the controls stiff and uneven. Oil pressure dropped dangerously low. He wasn't even sure the landing gear would come down. But the engine, bless it, still roared. The trip back to the Hornet felt endless. Every minute stretched out, every vibration in the engine a question mark. But he'd done what he came to do. Below him, Peleliu burned, and the Marines steaming toward its shores would never know how close they'd come to being massacred. As the adrenaline drained from his system, the weight of what Stout had done hit him like a gut punch. He hadn't just bent his orders, he'd broken them clean in half. He was supposed to take pictures and come home. Instead, he'd attacked an entire enemy airfield, alone. A court-martial was very possible. At the very least, he'd face a wall of angry officers ready to chew him up from the deck crew all the way to the admiral. But as he stared out over the ocean, he knew he'd made the right call. Watching 40 Japanese aircraft tear through the Marines would have been worse than any punishment the Navy could dream up. Then, a flicker on the horizon. The USS Hornet. Home. He keyed the radio, his voice steady but worn. Hornet, this is Stout. Aircraft damaged, uncertain on landing gear. Requesting priority landing. The carrier turned into the wind. Deck cleared. Crash crews stood ready. He dropped the gear. One wheel locked, the other didn't. Not great. He came in fast, slammed onto the deck hard enough to make metal groan. The Hellcat caught the second wire, jolting to a brutal stop. When the deck crew rushed in, they froze. The aircraft looked like it had flown through hell and back. Tail section shredded, fuselage peppered with holes, scorched paint streaked black from fire and smoke. Stout climbed out of the cockpit, stiff and exhausted, to find a wall of officers waiting. The air boss demanded to know why a recon pilot had returned with combat damage. The squadron commander wanted to know why he'd broken radio silence. The intelligence officer just asked flatly, "What happened over Peleliu?" Stout's reply was calm, almost casual. "The airfield wasn't abandoned," he said. "It was full of aircraft, prepping to attack the invasion fleet. I destroyed them, all of them." The room went silent. The intelligence officer blinked, then asked him to repeat it. "How many aircraft?" 40, Stout said simply. 40 planes, one pass after another. 8 minutes, start to finish. They didn't believe him. Not at first. But the next day, reconnaissance photos confirmed everything. The northern airfield at Peleliu was nothing but scorched earth. Every aircraft destroyed. The burned-out remains of exactly 40 Japanese planes lay scattered across a blackened runway, fuel dumps reduced to craters, hangars flattened. The analysts revised their reports. When the Marines landed, they faced 0 Japanese aircraft. Total air superiority. One pilot, flying alone and disobeying orders, had erased the entire threat and saved thousands of lives before the first shot was ever fired on the beach. The Navy didn't ignore what Robert "Cowboy" Stout had done. They awarded him the Navy Cross, the service's second highest medal for combat valor. The official citation praised his extraordinary heroism and aggressive fighting spirit in attacking vastly superior enemy forces completely alone. His decision to strike had saved countless lives, though the battle that followed would still prove one of the bloodiest in the Pacific. 3 days later, on September 15, 1944, the Marines hit the beaches of Peleliu. What they found was a nightmare. The island was a fortress. Coral ridges honeycombed with caves, bunkers, and pillboxes. Every inch was defended. The fighting raged for over 2 months, costing nearly 2,000 American lives. Even so, without Stout's attack, those numbers would have been far higher. Had those 40 Japanese aircraft still been operational, they would have hit the invasion fleet at its most vulnerable moment, when the landing craft were packed tight and the Marines had nowhere to take cover. Air attacks on amphibious landings were pure slaughter. But thanks to Stout, the threat was gone before the first wave even hit the shore. Historians would later estimate that his solo strike probably saved between 500 and 1,000 Marines on the first day alone. 8 minutes of courage had accomplished what might have taken an entire squadron of bombers. And he'd done it at exactly the moment when it mattered most, before the enemy could disperse or hide their planes. After the war, Stout went home to California. He lived quietly, far from the noise and glory of the stories that might have been told about him. He never bragged. His children grew up knowing their father had flown in the Pacific, but not much more than that. The Navy Cross stayed tucked away in a drawer, not on display, not even mentioned unless someone asked. Friends described him as humble, modest to the point of discomfort, with praise. When someone brought up Peleliu, he'd shrug it off with the same simple line every time. "I saw planes that needed destroying, so I destroyed them." Any pilot would have done the same, but that wasn't true. Most would have followed protocol, filed a report, and waited for orders. Most would have let the chain of command handle it. And in the meantime, 40 Japanese planes would have taken to the skies. Stout's refusal to wait, his willingness to trust his instincts and act alone, changed everything. His story remained a footnote for decades, buried in mission reports and award citations, until historians began piecing it together. When they matched his Navy Cross record with Japanese archives and reconnaissance photos, the scale of what he'd done finally came into focus. 1 pilot, 1 plane, 8 minutes, 40 enemy aircraft destroyed, and thousands of Marines who lived because Robert "Cowboy" Stout didn't wait for permission to do what he knew was right. He went up alone. 1 man, 1 plane, and in just 8 minutes, he turned an enemy airfield into a smoking graveyard. 40 aircraft destroyed before they ever left the ground. Maybe his actions spared countless Marines from a massacre before they even reached shore. Those men fought through nightmare conditions on that coral island. Caves, ridges, and relentless fire. But they never faced the 40 Japanese planes that should have been waiting for them. In the end, Stout's greatest act of heroism wasn't the flying. It was the choice. The choice to break the rules when obedience meant failure. He didn't disobey out of pride or rebellion. He did it because the mission came first, and he understood something simple but profound. Sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is not follow orders. His story didn't end with that flight. It became part of how the military teaches courage today. In every tactics classroom, every simulator, pilots still study what Stout proved in the sky. that real leadership means knowing when to think for yourself. Rules matter, but so does instinct. Blind obedience can lose battles. Initiative can win them. Generations of aviators have learned from him that sometimes the right move is the one no one told you to make. The courage to act when orders fall short. That's what separates survivors from heroes. So the next time you're standing at a crossroads, when following the rule book feels wrong and doing what's right could cost you everything, remember Robert Cowboy Stout. Picture him banking over that burning airfield, knowing full well the risk. He didn't wait for permission. He saw what had to be done, and did it anyway. Because sometimes not acting is the greater failure.